You, Bishop. It's nice to see you too. My name is Don Kramer. I'm a layperson from Wauwatosa Avenue United Methodist Church. My pronouns are he, him, and his. And I serve as the statistician for the Wisconsin Annual Conference. I've been doing this for about 15 years now. Before I get to the report, I want to say the question I'm asked the most often is, how does someone get this job? And simply, I asked for it. I was here at Annual Conference and I saw a vacancy and I said, I have those skills, and I asked, can I do that job? And so this weekend, you might be down there thinking like, I wish I could do that thing, or I'm really interested in that project. Speak up. People don't know you have that interest unless you speak up. And also just 15 years ago, I was a young adult. I wasn't representing my church. I was the youth or the young adult rep from my district. And so if you're thinking you're too young, too old, too experienced, too something, remember, our Bible has lots of stories of people that thought they were too something, and they weren't. They got the job done. So step up if you're moved to do so, please. So that was not the stats report. Let's get to the stats report. All right. Again, Don Kramer, Wauwatosa Avenue United Methodist Church. Today I have three goals. I want to talk about the annual process we go through to collect this data. I want to go over some characteristics of the conference, and I want to talk about some year-over-year trends in my time with you. Every year by discipline, every local church across the denomination is required to submit their data from the previous year. Here in Wisconsin, we ask local churches to do that by the end of February. Then I go through that data and I look for errors. I follow up with the local churches. I ask, did you really mean this when you entered these numbers? I then have to submit our conference data to the General Council of Finance and Administration, GCFA, by the end of April. Then they look through the data, they come back to me and they ask questions. Currently we're in that process now of me following up with what they are asking about. We will finalize the data by the end of the year. That data is then used looking at trends. The big thing we use it for is calculating apportionments, but it's used in all sorts of ways besides that as well. Up on the screen, this is the data from Data. This is our north central jurisdiction. Alphabetically, Wisconsin's at the bottom, but we're also one of the smaller districts, smaller conferences in the jurisdiction. I just want to point out, there's a lot of data here. That's collected by local churches, all right? Every church is submitting something. That's hundreds and thousands of people that are involved in this process. It's not me going around gathering the data. It's me collecting what other people are gathering. And I'm very grateful for all that work that the local pastors, the local lay leaders, the local treasurers, associates, everyone that's helping with that. I'm very grateful for that work. And that's why I'm sharing this information on that screen. In 2025, we submitted data for about 376 churches. I'm saying it's around that because we have churches closing and opening and merging, but at the end of, or during 2025, we had data from about 376 churches here in Wisconsin. 76% of them got that data in on time. That's important because the more late churches there are, the more administrative work I have to do and the less analysis work I have to do. So we had 76% getting it on time. 18 churches, or 5%, submitted no or partial data, so then I end up estimating their information based on the prior year. So as accurate as we want the data to be, we do know there's some issues here with missing data. Our conference has 4 districts. We reconfigured our districts a couple of years ago. On the left here is the distribution of our churches by district. It's still pretty evenly distributed amongst the 4 districts. On the right is how the membership is distributed amongst our districts. You can see the yellow and the orange. Those are the southern districts. They have slightly more members than the northern districts, which based on the distribution of our state, that makes sense. 34,000 members is where Wisconsin currently stands. That's about a 5% drop from 2024. Another way of thinking about how our churches are distributed, this is a histogram showing the number of members of a church. The way you read a histogram is the height of the bar is counting how many churches fit within that range, which is along the x-axis. So that first column shows about 75 of our churches in our conference have between 0 and 25 members. About 100 churches are between 25 and 50 members. Over on the right, I cut off 16 churches that are above 300 members just because it loses some detail in the graph. But this is right skewed data. You can see the average church size is about 93 members, but because it's right skewed, a median is really a much better way of thinking about what a typical church is experiencing. Our median church size is 56 members. That's really small, okay, when we think about that. So if your church has 57 members, you are in the top half of churches in this conference. And that's, I don't mean that as a value judgment, but really something for us to consider when we're making decisions. We can't be thinking about, the big churches so much as we're a lot of small churches. How are we going to work together and really use all of our unique smallness to really be efficient and effective with our ministry? Just because I realize the bishop always asks this, how many worshipers we have, our median worship size is 28. So 50% of our churches are worshiping on a Sunday, 28 worshipers. This is another way I like looking at the data. How much are churches paying their pastors? So I combined salary and housing, and this is the number of churches that are paying these dollar amounts, which are across the bottom, across the x-axis. So you can see that that first big bar is about 60 churches are paying their pastor between $10,000 and $15,000. So that would be a quarter-time pastor. The other, you see a bump there between $50,000 and $55,000. That's the minimum for a full-time elder in Wisconsin. So you can sort of imagine why there's some bumps there. This is counting the number of churches. It's not counting the clergy. So you can imagine there's quite a few churches that are yoked together in a charge, and so there's many more full-time pastors that are just working with multiple part-time churches. Those aren't necessarily the correct terms, but it's how I'm thinking about it in my head. All right. Next one. Oops. I looked at how churches spent their money. This is how their expenses were distributed back in 2025. Those two blue sections are our personnel expenses. We are an organization that doesn't make things. We don't sell things. We build relationships. So it makes sense that about half of our expenses go towards our personnel. That dark blue is pastoral expenses, and then all other staff is the light blue. The pink and the red are expenses that are tied to the building. So our operations, which includes utilities and insurance, office expenses, that's the dark red. Capital improvements, that's the pink. That really fluctuates year over year, but in 2025, 11% of our expenses went towards capital improvements. Apportionments, 8.4% of the local churches' expenses went towards apportionments. Then that light blue I have for other benevolence, monies that went towards local food banks or the national or the United Methodist UMCOR. So these are other places that the local churches are giving their money. And then programming is that yellow section, music, worship, all of those programming expenses are in that yellow section. I should point out, this is the local churches. This is not how the conference is spending its money. This is how all 369 local churches, all of their money together, how they're spending it, how they spent it in 2025. Then this is how we took in money in 2025. So you can see that largest component is donations. That's pledges, tithes, holiday offerings. It's not really surprising to think that 63.6% of our revenue is coming from donations. The cooler colors there, the green, the purples, the blues, these are things that in the stats report we call budgeted income. So these are things that stay somewhat steady year over year. The transfer of assets is in green, building use at 3.5%, fundraising in the light blue at 3.6%. The warmer colors, the orange, the red, and the yellow, these are more designated funds or things that fluctuate much more year over year. Capital campaigns in 2025 was 2.2% of income. If you're paying attention, that doesn't seem to match the expenses, but if you imagine your capital campaign, sometimes you're raising money in one year and then spending it the next year. So that's why sometimes there's not that connect in that specific year. Memorials at 5.7%, and designated giving, that could be special Sundays. It could also be designated giving within your church, such as someone wants money only to go toward the music program or youth programming or something. And then other income, that gray section, is just all the things we don't know where else to put them. So a lot of that is grants, okay? So a lot of that is grants that individual churches are getting. I want to show how we've been receiving money, what are the trends in our revenue. So this is just that donation section. In the last 7 or 8 years, we've dropped from receiving about $50 million to about $40 million. So a drop of about 20%. Keep in mind, though, in that same time period, we lost about 40% of our members, okay? So yes, dropping donations 20% is big, but it's not proportional to the membership loss that we had at the same time. I don't know how to interpret that, but it's what happened. This next screen, the other budgeted income, I find this one has probably the most stories on this slide. Fundraising, you can see that light blue took a big drop in 2020. It makes sense, you can't have spaghetti dinners when everyone's in lockdown. But you can see that there's slow growth in fundraising since then, but we still haven't gotten back to our pre-pandemic level of fundraising. Building use stayed pretty steady and then picked up in 2024 and 2025. I don't know if that means there's more churches that are making more outreach to their community who are using the building, or if they're just raising the fees to use their buildings. But it looks pretty steady, and then something has changed in the last 2 years. And then transfer of assets, that is just a clear trend. Churches are going more and more into their savings, into their foundations to pay their expenses. And then this next screen is all of those other designated incomes, and I really am just showing this to show like they go up and down a lot, all right? It's something that's tough to plan for. When conferences talk about how they calculate apportionments, there's a reason that oftentimes these incomes aren't used in that calculation, because there is just a lot of oscillation that goes up and down. It's tough to plan based on these items. Again, this is how things have changed in the last 7 years. Membership has decreased 39% in that same amount of time. Donations decreased 19%, fundraising decreased 21%, but building use increased 31%, and the transfer of assets increased 163%. Finally, this is something that I like talking about every year. I often hear people lamenting the loss of membership in our conference. In my mind, the loss of membership is a symptom. It's not something you deal with directly. It's a symptom of other things that we could actually affect. And the things that I've picked out of the stats reports that we could affect as local leaders in our churches is whether or not we offer Christian formation groups, small groups, and community outreach. Currently in 2025, only between 72 and 78% of our churches are offering these items, all right? On the school system, we're a solid C student. I think if we really do want to see growth, if we want to see growth in ministry and growth in our own development, we should really be looking at increasing those percentages year over year. My takeaways, I hope you have. I actually had a lot more slides than this. I had to cut them down. If you want to see more of it, I've recorded all of those slides, and it will be available on the conference YouTube channel sometime next week, or maybe even after that. If you have questions for me, my email address, statistics.wisconsinumc@gmail.com. Again, I don't work for the conference. I'm a volunteer, so you have to contact me through Gmail. And then, again, if we're looking to increase in many different ways, please help your church engage in Christian formation, small groups, and ministry outreach. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. Thank you so much.